Okay. So I've got all the stuff I need. First thing that I want to do is kind of talk about your tools in your table tool bin, okay? And I already have the tiles that I rolled the other day and my chunk of clay. So in our table tool bin, we already talked about the ruler, straight edge for measuring. I'm going to tell you guys uses that I use the tools for. It doesn't mean that that's the only use. If you have a use for the tool, as long as you're not breaking it, you can use it, for whatever use play related that you have. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the most common uses and what I tend to use them for. But if you're like, oh, this would work really well for blank, as long as you're not breaking my tools, that's totally fine. Okay, so we already learned about this tool. What is it? Needle tool. So we used it for cutting. We're also going to be able to use it for carving. So maybe carving our designs in. Okay. We also already learned this one. What's this one? Fettling knife. Okay. Main thing that I use this one for is cutting. It also makes an impression. Really, any of the tools are going to make an impression. So you can always use them to make impressions. If you look at the wrong end of it, it would make a really nice circle impression. Same thing with the wrong end of the needle tool. It would make a really nice circle impression. You could also use it to create a texture by just kind of dotting it in with the needle end, okay? Next we have wooden modeling tools. They have all different ends, and you might even look through some of the other bins. Some of the bins have different ones. They are good for smoothing. So if you look at, they all have different ends. Some of the ends look like a finger or a thumb, so they can work for smoothing. They're also really good to create textures and for impressions. So if you think about pushing in over and over again, each end is going to create a different impression. Some of the tools are really good to get into crevices for smoothing. Okay, so those are wooden modeling tools. You are going to be tested over these tools eventually, knowing the names of them. I think it's important to know the names of them. They are all labeled on your tool bin, and there's a picture. So just kind of every time you grab a tool, look at the picture, look at the name, kind of start committing things to memory, okay? Next we have small and large ribbon tools. They're called ribbon tools because the ends look like flattened pieces of ribbon. It's flattened metal. The larger ones are a little bit sharp, so be careful. The smaller ones aren't really sharp at all. Large ones are really good if you need to take out a big chunk of clay. I would say that you're not really going to use the large ones for this project, but as we move forward, you're going to notice that I'm going to give you more uses for the tools. And then again, the wrong end is going to be a good impression. You could even push that in and it would create an impression, but for the most part, they're used to chunk out large pieces of clay. The small ones, this end specifically is good for carving. If you need to carve a little bit thicker line, okay, that'll take out of the surface. And then each end, you can kind of make different shapes when you carve out little chunks of clay, okay? These ones, they don't really have an official name. I call them the double-ended rubber tools. Super technical. This is one of my very favorite tools. It's really good for smoothing. The end is rubber and it's flexible. You can get into small crevices. You can carve with it. Because it's a smooth rubber, it makes a really nice line. So I really like these ones. Good for smoothing, good for carving. And then finally, we have scoring kidney. So it looks like a kidney. That's why it's called that. Scoring kidney. So that one has the teeth used for scoring, which I'll talk about during the demo. And then smooth kidney. Not really going to use these for this project. They're really good for smoothing. These are one of my favorite tools. This project, they're not going to be very helpful, but as we move along, I'm going to show you some really good uses for the smooth kidney, okay? So those are all of our tools. So now let's get to it. So most of you have cut your tiles. If you haven't yet, when you see me next class, your entire period is going to be work time, okay? So I'm going to pull out my tiles that I rolled on Friday. And if you rolled tiles yesterday or Friday, when you went to get them out, what did you notice about them? What was different? They were a little bit harder, okay? That's actually a good thing, okay? They should still be pliable, nice and plastic. You should still be able to push into them, but you'll notice that they are a lot stiffer. That's actually a good thing. So our next state of play, so we started with really soft plastic clay. As the clay hardens, and you did all the right things, but the air still gets to them. So they're, gradually going to dry. This state of clay is leather hard. So the next state of clay to commit to memory, leather hard. So it's stiff yet pliable, okay? So it's a lot stiffer, it's holding its shape. You probably noticed with the soft clay, if you held it by the corner, it just drooped down. At this point, it's holding its own a little bit better, so it's going to be a little bit easier to work with. It's going to be easier to smooth. Leather hard is the best state of clay to carve into and to smooth. So this is where we want to be right now. So if you rolled your tiles today, by Thursday you'll be at leather hard, so you'll be ready to get your designs on there. You'll be ready to start adding things, okay? What we want to make sure that we do before we actually get our designs on here is make sure that they're really nice and smooth, really nice and even. The more that you can do as you go, the better off you'll be in the end. If you kind of try to smooth and keep things clean as you go, by the end you'll just have some little touch-up work and it'll be a lot easier to clean up, okay? So I want to kind of square it off. So if you tap on the table to make sure that your tile's nice and square, that will help. And then I'm going to use a damp sponge again. Remember, we never want it sopping. If you fold it over the edge, that's going to get your edges nice and smooth. I also like fingers. My finger is one of my favorite ceramic tools, okay? Because you can control how much pressure you're putting on the clay, and if there's a little divot, I can push a little harder to kind of move the clay to fill in the divot. Okay, so we want to get these as smooth and even as we can before we get our design on there. The other thing that I want to note, as far as demos go, when I'm doing a demo, I'm doing it fairly quickly, whereas you're going to have 5 or 6 working days for this project. I'm doing this demo in 20 minutes. So I am showing you the techniques. I am not showing you an exemplary project. I'm only going to work on one tile right now, yet I'm going to show you how to get your design in there, and I'm going to show you all 4 decorating techniques on one tile. So just know that my demos are just to show you the techniques. It is not to show you an exemplary project, okay? If you're looking for exemplary projects, you're going to look back to the PowerPoint on Schoology, or you're going to look at past examples on my Instagram account. That is also going to be an exemplary project, okay? Most of the projects on my Instagram were probably A projects. So I'm going to get front and back smooth, okay? Even though we don't see the bottom very much, would you buy something in a store that looked cruddy on the bottom? You wouldn't. So we want to make sure that all parts of our artwork looks good, okay? So I got that nice and smooth. Now I am ready for my design. So I'm going to grab some scissors. I think I'm going to do the Colts one. And remember, your sketches were 4x4. Make sure that you're cutting your photocopy. Don't cut up your sketches. Those are your original designs. And if we need to photocopy them again, we want to make sure that we have them and we don't want to destroy your packet, okay? So I've cut that out. I've decided to do this one. What you need to keep in mind as you start to decide what you're going to trace, you only want to trace what makes the most sense, okay? So I'm going to impress my circles. I'm not going to trace them because I think I'm going to use the end of a fettling knife to impress it. You can put that on my desk. Thank you so much. So I'm not actually going to trace my circles. I am going to trace my Colts horseshoe because I think that's going to be difficult to get it just like that again, to get it nice and symmetrical. So that is the part that I'm going to trace. So I'm going to lay this on my clay, and I'm going to use a needle tool to trace through. A couple things to keep in mind. The longer that this piece of paper sits on my clay, what's going to happen?
Moisture, it sucks up.
It's going to suck up the moisture from my clay, and it's going to get really flimsy, and it's going to tear a lot easier. So that's okay, but try to get your designs on there quickly. Don't let it just sit on there for a while or your paper is just gonna fall apart. Now, here's the other thing to keep in mind. If you do get paper in your clay, how hot does the kiln get? Does anybody remember?
Too hot.
Too hot. About 2,000 degrees. Do you think paper is gonna burn at 2,000 degrees?
Yeah.
Yeah, promise, it will. So, paper will burn out of your clay. So if you have, bless you, a little bit of paper in your clay, no worries, it burns out in the kiln, okay? So I'm gonna get this horseshoe on there. And you'll notice when I take off the paper, it's gonna be kind of a faint indented line where I carved, or where I traced, okay? So, I do have a little bit of paper, no big deal. It's gonna burn out in the kiln. And then you'll notice it's kind of just faintly indented, enough that I can see it, but I'm not gonna wanna leave it that way. So now I'm gonna go back through and I'm actually gonna carve into it, okay? A couple different tools that we can carve with. I've got my needle tool, okay? If I use my needle tool, it's gonna make a really thin line. I'm taking clay out of the surface. Which decorating technique did I just perform? Subtraction. So if you're carving in every single one of your designs, you have plenty of subtraction on your tiles, okay? I will tell you, with the needle tool, sometimes it leaves what I call clay boogers. So they're just these little boogers that stay in the clay. I will teach you how to clean those up next week. So get your line as good as you can get it, but I promise I'll show you some cleanup techniques next week, okay? So needle tool is gonna be for thin, detailed lines. We can also use our double-ended rubber tool. I like this one. Okay, so I'm just gonna continue my line. It's pretty flexible. Okay, so automatically, I think it creates a neater line, but it's a little bit more faint, so it's not as pronounced. And it is cleaner right away, okay? And it's a little bit thicker. So if you're doing something super detailed, you probably don't want that rubber-ended tool because it's gonna make a thicker line. Thicker still is if I use the small ribbon tool. So if I continue that line, it's gonna take a lot more clay out of the surface. Again, a little bit cleaner line right off the bat than that needle tool line, but it's a lot thicker. So again, if you need some detailed or thin line, you don't want to use that little ribbon tool, okay? So those are all your options for carving, those three tools, okay? The other way that I can subtract is by completely piercing. So maybe I want to actually pierce out one of these circles. So I'm gonna kind of trace it on there. And then I'm gonna cut through. Lots of clay boogers, so I'm gonna push that through. And then if you kind of take your finger and pull away from that carved line, you're gonna be able to clean that up. So obviously I subtracted clay. So carving and piercing both count for subtraction. What else do I need?
Addition.
I need to add clay somewhere, okay? So anytime that you are adding clay to the surface of your tile, what do we have to keep in mind as far as clay thickness goes? Clay thickness, 1/4 of an inch. Anything that we attach, we want to stick right around 1/4 of an inch. I absolutely never want to see a giant solid chunk of clay. Why don't we want solid chunks of clay? They can explode in the kiln, right? There could be air bubbles in it. So anytime you're attaching to your project, I'm gonna kind of wedge it here. We wanna make sure that we are right around 1/4 of an inch. Now, I'm gonna be attaching this little piece to my solid tile. I'm gonna go thinner than 1/4 of an inch. As long as it's being attached to a nice, sturdy, solid surface, you can go thinner than 1/4 of an inch, okay? So maybe I'm gonna attach that there. Anytime you are attaching one piece of clay to another, now, no matter how big or small it is, you must slip and score, okay? So anytime we're attaching one piece of clay to another, every single time, we have to slip and score. If I were to just put this on there It might stay while my clay is really soft, but as soon as it starts to dry, because we have smooth surface on smooth surface, it's gonna fall apart, okay? So how do we slip and score? We're gonna take the scoring tool and think of it like Velcro. We want it to stick. So I'm gonna rough up both surfaces where it's gonna attach. Is this in my way? Okay, if the scoring tool is too big, you can also use your needle tool to kind of rough it up, okay? Think Velcro, so score both, and then I'm gonna grab my white slip. Slip is like our glue. So we want it to stick. If you're thinking about gluing 2 pieces of paper together, you want enough glue that it's gonna stick, okay? But you don't want so much that it's gonna ooze everywhere. And then I'm gonna wiggle together where I scored, okay? You can use the double-ended rubber tool to clean up that extra slip. The other thing that you can use over here, I forgot to show you, we've got all different size paintbrushes. Paintbrushes are also gonna be helpful tools for you, okay? So we can take a little bit of water, again, nothing sopping, and you can go around that edge and that will help clean it up as well, okay? We just never want lots of sopping, slimy water on your tiles, okay? So anytime you attach a piece of clay to the surface, we have added clay. What other technique do we need? So we've subtracted, we've added. I heard impression first. Okay, so impression. Anytime you're pushing something in, pulling it right back out. The ends of all the tools, push it in, pull it right back out. That's an impression. That's an impression. I'm not taking any clay out of the surface, I'm just displacing the clay, okay? Some of the wooden modeling tools, I like this one, like if you're doing fish scales. So if I push that one in a pattern, okay, that kind of makes a little fish scale pattern, okay? So think about all the things we have. Anytime you're pushing in, pulling right back out, that counts as your impression. I do want to show you the press plates real quick. I think I would almost do this before you get anything else on your tile. You might try both sides on a scrap piece of clay to kind of see which one you like better. I'm gonna put that down, and then I'm gonna take my double-ended roller. I'm gonna roll it. And this will make sure that it hopefully rolls in evenly. Okay, look at that. So that's an impression, and then look at all that texture. Okay, so that's impression. Anytime you're pushing in, pulling right back out. And then last one that I need, I heard it, I need engobe. So which tile must there be engobe?
Value.
Your value tile, but engobe can show up on any of your other tiles as well, okay? You can use your finger. Okay, you can also use a paintbrush. Okay, if you want it to be a little bit lighter, you want to create different values, you can add some white slip back in and kind of blend it. The darkest that it will get is right out of the slip barrel, but you can kind of mix the two to create the value that you want. If it gets somewhere that you don't want it, you can take a ribbon tool and kind of just scratch the surface and it should come off, okay? I've got my 4 decorating techniques. That's what we're looking for. Make sure that you're not changing your designs too much because we want to make sure that the element principle combo is showcased, okay? Any questions? Okay. Bye guys, have a great day.